Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to give just a few moments for everyone to come on in, get situated, and we'll get started in just a little bit. And as always, we're always interested to hear where everyone's calling in from, if you will. So you have the chat box that's there next to you. If you would like, please just go ahead and share what city and state you're in right now. Oh, we have people from all over today. Great, great. Well, we'll go ahead and jump on in because I know that we have a very packed agenda here, and I want to make sure that we have time for all the just great discussion and questions and conversations that are coming along. So I'll go ahead and kick things off. My name is Melvin Hines, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Upswing. And today's presentation is on Is there still space to address the basic needs of non-traditional students in today's environment? And so what we're going to do is give a little bit of background on today's topic. We'll also share about some of the work that Upswing's done within that. And we'll also talk about how supporting some of those basic needs through the lens of one of our new partners, Single Stop, has really helped to provide some of that context. And that will be really great because we actually have two people who are connected here today from both Upswing as well as Single Stop, who I'll introduce shortly to do a Q&A session. And we'll have a lively discussion, and then we'll open up for the audience. So at any point in time throughout the conversation, you can go to your chat bar that you have there, and you should see a Q&A option that's there. Feel free to ask questions there. We have people who are monitoring it, so we'll be able to hop in and make sure that our guests get access and ability to answer some of those questions. So without further ado, we'll jump on in. Um, so just give a little bit of background about myself and Upswing. Upswing's been around since 2013. I originally co-founded Upswing really with the idea that what we wanted to do was help to support students who tend to come from backgrounds that aren't always the ones that are getting the most spotlight or getting the most shine, if you will. I grew up in South Georgia, a small town called Albany, and that really led me to wanting to be able to create resources that could help support students that were from also smaller towns and to be able to help them be successful as well. And that's really kind of led to the types of supports and the students that we've worked with over the course of time. You can see some of the statistics here in terms of who we've been able to help support. And I think that that's going to really help to shed a lot of light on these non-traditional students and the questions that we have today in our conversation. I've been really proud of the impact that we've been able to have so far. On average, we're helping to retain about 78 students annually as a result of the services that we have. And it's really because of being able to support students, not just through academics, but non-academic supports as well. And we're really going to be focusing on some of those academics, or sorry, some of those aspects that are specific to outside of the classroom. So where I wanted to first start was sharing how we really got into this idea and understanding of basic need support. And it's been through some of the messages and conversations that we've had uh, through our interactions with students in ANA. So just to give a little bit of background there, ANA works with colleges and universities to help provide proactive support and messages to their students about all the different types of resources that they have available on their campus to make sure that students feel like they're never alone. And here's an example here of how ANA can respond back and forth to different needs that students are having at any given point in time. And what that has led is to us being able to get data and an understanding on what are some of the biggest needs that students are saying that they're struggling with today. On average, we're making about 200 referrals per month with our partners through Anna, and we're giving dashboards and insights to share what are some of the biggest needs that are coming up. And some of those needs are, as I mentioned before, outside of the classroom. And that's really what we wanted to talk about today, how some of those questions, some of those concerns that students are having are showing up in an increasing fashion over the course of the last few years. And what we found is that the importance of providing that basic need support has never been greater than it is today. Um, in fact, there was a recent Hope Center study showcasing just how big that need has grown over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. 59% of students that were surveyed lacked consistent and adequate access to food or housing security. 75% of Black or Indigenous respondents reported at least one food or housing insecurity over the course of their period of time in college. And 67% of student parents surveyed have mentioned experiencing housing security. So these are really, really big numbers, of course. And I think that there a lot of times the stats that we're not always able to focus as much on because student parents and non-traditional students aren't always the students that tend to get the greatest amount of support, but their support is so much more critical, and that's a big part of why we wanted to have today's conversation. Here was actually a quote from a student that was part of that survey that said, "I'm trying to break generational curses and be the first college graduate in my family, and it seems I'm swimming upstream. I know I can do this with the right amount of knowledge, resources, and support. Please send help." And that's what we're talking about today is how we can help provide some of that support. Um, we know that colleges and college campuses all across the country have these resources available. Communities have those resources available, even if they're not available 24/7 within the colleges. But students who are coming in for the first time don't always know that those resources are available. In this exact same study, 48% of students that were surveyed mentioned that they didn't even know about basic needs support services that were on their campus. Um, and 79% of students who either stopped out of college or considered doing so cited basic need security, insecurity, or financial challenges as their reasoning for deciding to do so. Here are just some of the study or some of the messages and interactions that we've had just through Anna, for example. Here's one student saying, "I've been directly impacted by Hurricane Helene with loss of power in excess of 3 days. Unfortunately, I've lost all the food in my freezer and my refrigerator. In addition, I'm diabetic and lost all my insulin as well." She goes on to say that she's trying to, finish her assignments. She's trying to stay focused on the classroom, but as we all know here today, when the world is feeling like it's crumbling around you, it's really hard for you to stay focused on what you need to happen as well. And she mentions that this is becoming very overwhelming. We've seen other examples here on where people have reached out to our virtual assistant Anna saying that they're struggling, for example, to pay rent for off-campus apartments, struggling with potentially being evicted, asking if there are any assistance programs that are available. And again, we know that these resources are available in those communities, but a lot of times they just don't know where to find them. Another person reached out. All these are real conversations, by the way, of someone who's looking for affordable housing after graduation, saying that they're being kicked out of school, or sorry, being kicked out of their house after finishing school, and are is even potentially indicating self-harm as a result of just how overwhelming everything is feeling for them. And so we know that this is the life and the world in which many of our students are struggling with. But we also know that our college partners here, those who are on the call, are also trying to figure out how to balance all that with federal funding uncertainties, with so many changing pieces of our landscape taking place. And so the question really becomes, how are we doing more with what in a lot of cases tends to be less in terms of the resources that we have available for us. And so this is part of the reason why I'm really excited to have both Adrian and Stephen here on the call with us because we asked this question ourselves here at Upswing, and we were looking at what are some of the resources that could be available for us to partner with. And Single Stop, who's a nonprofit, was one of those organizations that we felt really stood out for a couple of reasons. The first, Single Stop is really good at helping students to be able to find those local resources all on a map, just by putting in their zip code. And so we thought, wow, this would be something that could be really powerful for some of those text messages that we're getting. But they go even further than that by providing resources like a social benefit screener to help students to understand perhaps there are public benefits that they didn't even know existed. Um, and finally, they also allow for schools to be able to see which students have taken advantage of some of those resources, which ones haven't, so that they can help to not only support the student by what they're saying, but also by what they're doing as well. And so when we were talking about this conversation here today, we were really excited about bringing together both Stephen Williams as well as Dr. Adrian Hagerbrook to have these conversations. Um, I'll start with Stephen Williams. So Stephen is the CEO of Single Stop. Prior to joining Single Stop, he spent over 30 years in enterprise software applications and services, from startups to top 100 software vendors, including IBM. Stephen has held leadership positions in all customer-facing operations, managed operations, and led transformational growth strategies globally. And over the past decade, Stephen has been responsible for corporate development and M&A with brand and reputation. And so we're really excited to have Stephen here today. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to just chat with us a little bit about some of the work that you all are seeing here at Single Stop and helping to answer some of these questions that are so relevant today.
Thank you, Melvin. Look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And our next guest is Dr. Adrian Hagerbrook. Um, Adrian, who's also from South Georgia, by the way. Every time we get on the call, I have to mention that. Is the founder and principal of Quintessentia Ventures. Quintessentia Ventures is dedicated to transforming social sector organizations by empowering them to achieve greater impact through innovative solutions, performance optimization, and strategic capacity building. Uh, they partner with organizations to develop scalable growth strategies, harness the power of data-driven decision-making, and design programs that deliver lasting results. With a comprehensive range of advisory services, they help organizations not only improve their outcomes, but also maximize their potential to drive meaningful change. And Adrian is also not just the founder and principal of Quinn and Essentia Ventures, he's also one of Upswing's board members and has been really insightful and helpful in helping us to think about how we can better support students holistically, um, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom as well. So, Adrian, I really appreciate your time today and welcome to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, and glad to be here as well.
Great. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that we can have a little bit more real estate to talk. And I wanted to start off by asking both of you a question. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to answer first. But I think it would be really good for us to get a better understanding of just what brings you and what drives you into the education landscape. So, what caused each of you to want to get involved in the various educational success options and opportunities that you've been able to achieve over the course of your lives?
Adrian, would you like to start?
Uh, sure, I'll represent South Georgia in this in the beginning. My story actually begins with my father, who grew up in the Deep South, and had the opportunity, or had three choices that he could have made coming out of high school. One was to potentially go to college, and again, remembering at that time in the period of the 50s, there weren't a lot of options, clear pathways or options for, particularly for Black Southern men. And so it was the possibility of going to college. The second was to either stay in his hometown. Ended up being a career military United States Air Force. He went back to college after he retired from the United States Air Force on the GI Bill. So watching him do this while I was in high school and while I was in college was the impetus to really drive this. My grounding in this work, and as Melvin mentioned, the work that I'm doing now, but I spent over 3 decades in higher education in the United States, doing local, domestic, as well as global work. And the thing that really drives me in this work and continues to drive me in this work is what is it that we're doing to create access and opportunity using post-secondary as a mechanism for social mobility. And for me, I think the formula that we got right a few decades ago was the access piece. But it hasn't been until most recently, in the last couple of decades, that we've really focused on the success aspect of that.
Well, we didn't connect on this prior to the call, but I can share that I have a similar inspiration source as
Mm.
Adrian for my interest in and belief in the power of education. My father grew up in very challenging economic circumstances. I'll say one of 8 children on a farm they didn't own, and were able to eke out a living on the back of that farm. But those 8 children all went to a single room schoolhouse and eventually produced a handful of PhDs and other professionals out of that cohort. So I saw firsthand the value of education early on, and then the ambition and challenge that each of them took up to further themselves to make it out of those conditions that they were born into. And so much of my professional career, outside of this work that I've done with Single Stop, has been focused on working with nonprofits in an education focus. So, coming to Single Stop now, the mission of Single Stop is to create economic mobility by connecting people to benefits. I love that because it matches exactly the experience that I had with my family and myself for that matter. So, helping individuals stay in school and earn a degree or a certificate is still the most promising path to economic mobility we have. All the data supports that. I'm so proud of what Single Stop is doing to further that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with that more. That, of course, is a big part of the reason why, I started Upswing as well, is that, there might be a lot of options and opportunities for certain types of communities and certain cities and larger cities, but when you come from, smaller, more rural towns, education is certainly one of the biggest opportunities for upward mobility that you can have available for you. So let's kind of dive into this a little bit more. We're really talking a lot about non-traditional students here, and I first would like to ground us into understanding what we mean by that. So, what first comes to mind to you when you think of non-traditional students? Um, and based on that understanding, where are you seeing some of the most pressing needs take place within these specific demographics here?
Well, the first thing that I think of is the visual of my father, and literally sitting at a card table in my mother's bedroom with his books open, and having come from class after having worked all day. And this was in the early 1980s. And so this was even before there was nomenclature of what a non-traditional student was. And oh, by the way, the other visual that I have is that being at my father's college graduation, he graduated 1 year before I graduated from college. And so it is possible. It is that opportunity. So I think it's a compelling question because we all may have a perception of what a non-traditional student is, and I've actually changed my vernacular to really thinking of not as a non-traditional student, but as the new learner. Or there are a number of labels that are associated with that, and here's the reason why. New data and consistent data over the last couple of years have actually shown that at least 70% of all undergraduate students who are earning towards an associate's or a bachelor's degree have one or more attributes of what used to be called a non-traditional student. And so they either had a delayed entry from into post-secondary from high school. They have financial independence. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are making a ton of money. It just means that they are financially independent. They have one or more people that they're taking care of. So they're a caretaker either for their children or for a generation ahead of them or someone in their lifespan. They're employed, various levels of employment. It could be part-time, full-time. Um, they're part-time learners, and so they're not doing this, full speed. They're not residentially based, nor are they just singularly focused on their studies. And in fact, more commonly, they don't consider themselves students who work. They consider themselves workers attending school. And so that is a very different perspective in how to think about who that new learner or that non-traditional learner, and realizing that that really is a significant part of the populations that we serve. And sort of in my view, what I think are some of the most pressing needs, and you've illustrated that at the very beginning. There's always the financial aspect of things. The other piece that I would add to it, and I know this is a big portion of what we'll talk about as well, are things that are associated with mental health. But let me just add a couple of very textured pieces to the comments that I just made. So one, in terms of the needs of this new learner or the quote non-traditional learner, the biggest need is around not just the financial aspect of what does it cost to go, but they often cannot seize the opportunities that typical students do because they either have to maintain their economic balance in their households, or they're looking for ways to enhance it. So, that apprenticeship or that that work study or that other kind of experiential learning, the internship, that may not be an option because it will actually disrupt the balance within the financial picture or the economic picture of their household. The other bullet point that I'll sort of fix on is, and we'll talk more about this relative to mental health, but it's also having the flexibility because of the multiplicity of priorities within that learner's sphere, be it work, family, what have you. The very kind of typical traditional ways that we deliver educational experiences, or that we invite them into, hey, take advantage of these student support services. They can't do it because the inflexibility within our institutions and our organizations.
Yeah, that aligns well, Adrian, with how we see the non-traditional learner, all the characterizations you made there. And I'll just add that, we kind of see this profile of a student different from the traditional student in the sense that they've made a proactive choice to do this. That is different than the choice you make as I would, not to paint everyone with the same brush, but as a traditional student coming out of high school and going to college, you sort of have a different mindset about what that experience is going to be and what you're going to try to achieve in that, 2, 3, 4, 5 years that you're in that process. For the non-traditional student, they're juggling work, family, military service, all the things you mentioned, and they know that this is now critical to the well-being of themselves, their family, and those they support, maybe in the extended family even,
Mhm.
as part of this. They want to get ahead in their career. They want to take care of themselves. They want to take care of their kids and give them a greater opportunity in life as a consequence of it. So take all of the challenges that a traditional student has and magnify them. They have less time. They have competing priorities. They have challenges with, scheduling and childcare and transportation and all of those things. So it's just a magnified set of obstacles, but put into what we really want to encourage, which is this motivation to be successful, to do everything they can to stay engaged in the education process.
Absolutely. That's I'm glad that you mentioned that there, Stephen, because and I think this dovetails well into what you were mentioning earlier, Adrian. When we were showing those some of the just screenshots of some of the earlier text messages,
Mhm.
We were seeing that they were struggling with perhaps a financial need or struggle that took place, or perhaps a health issue that took place. And, we tend to talk about this idea of mental health and mental health supports as if it's an isolated, cylinder outside of everything else in the world. But, really what, I'm sure you all have seen, and certainly what many of our guests are seeing, is that uh, mental health and the challenges that stem from that are, and a lot of times, a symptom and a result of some of those basic needs challenges, right? If it's so critical for you to create that stability and that stasis in your family, and suddenly you've lost your job, or lost the ability to create a steady income, or you've lost so many other uh aspects and challenges that just tend to come up in day-to-day lives. That's going to be the thing that impacts your mental health. And so we'll see so much more of that take place with our non-traditional students, even as they are so much greatly more motivated. They're still dealing with so many more challenges that now we have to figure out ways to support them in those areas as well, just so that we can keep them, you know, um, on kind of that straight and narrow, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agreed.
And Melvin, I'd love to add to some of what Stephen has mentioned as well, in terms of the motivations. And you said this as well. What are the motivations? And so some of the reasons why we've seen such dramatic increases in these new learners, or however we want to frame them, is that there are motivations that are driving them into post-secondary. Whether it's career advancement, or promotion, whether it is changes or shifts in the economy, it's upskilling. There are a myriad of the changes in personal status, and so there are a myriad of motivations. And I think the tendency for people to see non-traditional learners from a deficit perspective versus the asset-based perspective. And I know one of the things that we may talk about a little bit later is, how do we shift the sort of the narrative or the stigma associated with this, is really understanding that these motivations are very core to how, or to what motivates that learner in his or her or their environment. And so really thinking about it from an asset-based perspective, and not just what they don't have.
Agreed.
Yeah, I love that. I recall you mentioning that on a previous conversation that we had, that people do tend to look at it from that deficit perspective. But there's a lot of strength and a lot of
Yeah.
beauty and what they're able to provide and offer into the overall experience as well. Um, we're actually already getting some questions in, so I'll pepper in some of these as well. Um, uh, So, Racine Pascu, I hope I said your name there correctly. Said, I'm interested in poverty-induced trauma and how it impacts learners. How should institutions incorporate financial literacy and mental health strategies into our work?
That is a fantastic question. There is a growing level of emphasis on financial literacy that we're seeing. In fact, even becoming a required component of any funding that's being given in a lot of educational grants. The um, the focus for us at Single Stop is helping to satisfy, some of those healthcare and financially oriented baseline issues that people deal with. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of need. Unless you have established yourself, your shelter, being able to feed yourself, and get above those bottom layers of the foundation, you really don't have mental bandwidth to think about much else or spend the quality time you need to on your education. And part of that, in my mind, is also helping people understand where they are, socioeconomically, what the path is from that to a future state as a consequence of being able to earn a degree or certificate. And then as you're on that path, learn what you're going to need to do to budget appropriately for the lifestyle, for the amount of financial resource you're going to have available to you once you earn that degree or certificate. So, colleges have historically, certainly back when I was going, were really good about preparing you for a skill or a particular career, but you just sort of popped you out on the other side of that and said, "Good luck. You're now going to earn some money and, figure out how to pay all of your bills, your rent, and buy a car, and all of those things." And I walked into some of those early negotiations for buying something, anything, very, very ill-equipped to do a good job for myself and my family in that process, right? So I certainly see the value of it just alongside everything else you're learning in school.
Yeah. I love that. And Stephen, I was thinking about one of the one of the first arguments I got into with my partner, then girlfriend, eventually became my wife, was having just graduated, and I spent one of my first checks on a rack stereo system.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so, but the thing that I would offer to this question and conversation is that there's also what I believe to be an institutional or an organizational obligation. And this is where the professional development comes into play. And so what are we doing at our institutions? And some institutions are doing this and they're doing great work in this regard. But what is it that we're doing with our particular our frontline staff and also those who are influencers and decision makers, not influencers from a social media perspective, but influencers in terms of decision making. What are we doing around professional development around these very topics? And so it becomes a service question.
Mm,
We're not asking people to be clinicians. We're asking people to develop the kind of skills that are needed to have the right kind of empathy to understand and not judge. And as soft as that might sound, that's the very kind of training that you're seeing and training and development that's happening in service-oriented organizations. And so when you think of, oh, some place that you've gone to or some site that you've gone to and you feel like you were valued, that's because they actually understand who they're serving, why they're serving, and what are the needs of those who they're serving.
yeah, I really, I think that that's definitely something that we should double click on there because, in a previous webinar that we gave, we talked about slightly different, but still kind of similar conversation around how supporting students has changed over the years and especially has changed post-COVID. And how, students who are coming into college are a little bit different than or, are perhaps having different needs or different challenges than some of the students that came pre-COVID. One of the big challenges I think that comes from that um, is that if you're an administrator or staff member, your resources that you have available are not increasing to that's commensurate with some of those additional needs that are coming in. So, I'll start with you, Adrian, because I know that with your organization, you've been partnering with quite a few um, colleges and universities all across the country. How are institutions supposed to support more of this service-oriented approach when at the same time they're just recognizing that there just seem to be either fewer resources available for them or the perspectives on how those resources should be used seem to be changing.
So for a number of the organizations that I've been working with or that I've had a chance to study or even just in a network with, one of the things that they're doing, and they're doing it very in a relentless way, is ensuring that they have a learner-centric or student-centric framework for how they actually deliver in the learning environment. And so when I talk about that, they're actually placing the almost imagine a paradigm where you have the student or the learner at the center, and then they're building systems and structures and synergies and supports, understanding who their learners or their students are, and that's how they're prioritizing, and then that's how they're framing up the kind of decisions that need to be made. And so, there's and there are different schools of thought on this. There's one where if you design it well, it'll lift all boats. And then some who will say, well, you really need a very sort of segmented approach. And again, I won't, endorse one or the other. It's going to be predicated on who it is that you're serving, and then also building structures that really support um, uh, in a holistic way. And again, you're thinking of those solutions and supports. When you're doing that kind of prioritization and you're literally putting the learner at the center, you make different choices. And
Mhm.
so it may not necessarily be the lack of resources, it's really more about the allocation of resources to those things that are priorities.
Mm.
And so really thinking more deeply about that. The other thing that I'm seeing as a part of this is really thinking about um, institutions and organizations are understanding not just the learner centricity aspect of this, but how to ensure that they're remaining relevant to the learner and in the context in the environment in which they're serving. So here's a keen example. I was just with a community college system in Ohio just a couple of months ago, and they're rebuilding or enhancing their strategic plan and strategic planning. And at the core of almost every objective is the learner. And so it really is building these supports. And so now they'll be moving forward in their strategic planning, prioritizing the things that make sense to learners. And again, we all know that you've got to have the operational stuff, you got to have all that in place. But how do you ensure that you're synergizing your systems to create as least amount of friction as possible for the learner so that his or her or their trajectory or their pathway can be as seamless? It doesn't mean necessarily that they're always going to follow this one path, but that you've got on and off ramps that make sense to the learner given his or her or their life journey.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I know Stephen, that's something that Single Stop has really endeavored um, to simplify for these learners as well. Specifically, how there's really just one place that they go to find out what are all the myriad of federal, state, local, perhaps resources and benefits that could be allocated to them. I'd be interested to just hear more about what you're seeing. Also, how has that changed over? Um, I'm really interested in the last 12 months or so. How have you seen that change, and how are you all able to respond to some of those changes?
Right. Yeah, well, only more severe over the past year, I would say the past 12 months. But from a cost point of view, knowing that everyone who's on the call today is facing budgetary constraints and pressures, and in an environment politically where that's even more uncertain, right? So our point of view is, the human touch is paramount, but you're never going to be able to hire enough staff
Mm,
to meet the need. And so you have to find a force multiplier. You
right.
have to, think about technology as extra arms and legs to do this. And to that point, Melvin, the same issues: housing, food insecurity, mental health support, and then for the learners we're talking about today, childcare, transportation, and a variety of other issues, specific to their environment, have become even more pronounced. And so for us, the goal is to take as much uncertainty and time out of the front end of this process as
Mm,
possible. If you were to sit and try to think about, or even Google or Grok or whatever, AI chat GPT you got, try to find all the benefits that you might be eligible for. It's a lengthy research project that you might be on. And even when you learned of a particular benefit, knowing whether you're eligible for it is another huge
mm,
set of
mm,
obstacles to
mhm.
cross. So we just, the rules are there. We've just concatenated them into a software product that essentially tells you exactly what they are and what you're eligible for.
Mm,
So that time constraint is just gone. In 10 to 15 minutes, what you could apply for from a benefit point of view. And then you showed the map earlier. If you need assistance immediately, being able to find a food pantry that's open right now, even in disaster affected areas like Hurricane Helene that you showed before from that chat, that's available to the student immediately on a self-service basis, or if they come into a student center or basic needs office. So taking all of that research and wondering about, am I eligible? What is the current status of this particular benefit politically? What has the criteria changed? All of those things. We keep that updated in the software so that now you, as someone assisting the student, can spend your time helping them apply for a benefit they're going to get or find a community resource that will help them immediately. And then beyond that, stay engaged in their journey. So that huge bulk of time and uncertainty up front is gone, if you leverage the technology to do it.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a big need and certainly a big help in today's environment for sure. Um, there's a couple questions that have come in, and so I want to open these up to you all as well. The first one is from Linda Evil, who says, "First, go dogs," which appreciate the shout out there.
Well, I'm a Longhorn, so I'm afraid we're going to
Uh-oh.
be at odds with the Georgia Bulldogs. Yeah.
Um, so the students that we are talking about, many lack the support at home when the home life wants sorry, many lack the support at home, and then the home life wants that students to give them what they have. And um, sorry, I think I'm missing. All right, so many lack the support at home, um, and then there's the home life wants, and so when discussing this mental health part, do any of the programs for aftercare also encourage the students to learn boundaries so that they can grow and use their education to advance their lives and get out of what they're trying to climb out of? So I think to kind of summarize that up a little bit, basically what Linda's wanting to understand is, are we seeing different types of programs, perhaps similar to the ones that you are referring people to, Stephen, or perhaps others that were being used at Southern New Hampshire, Adrian, that are helping students not only in their immediate needs, but also helping them to create the structures and boundaries to be able to the next time they go through that same challenge to be stronger and be able to make it through those challenges.
I think if you're
Yes.
not, if go ahead, Adrian.
No, 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 no. I was going to go ahead, Steve.
Okay. So I think if you're not providing that kind of resource on campus as part of, the kinds of courses that enable students to fully engage in their college experience, then where I would point you is to uh, it's going to vary a little bit across the country, but in general, there's going to be a community resource that you can provide access to that student. And your role or your team or whoever on your staff work in basic needs, their ability to be, maybe they're not a licensed counselor, but they can see what's going on with a student and can provide that kind of guidance and immediately show them where that assistance can be found on a schedule or a time frame that will work with them or for them. And most of these community resources are things that are made available to those students or to the public who qualify for them based on very simple criteria, but we're not talking about an extra cost associated with it. So just being able to know that they're there, exactly the kinds of services they provide, in this case, how you can learn the behaviors that will enable you to be successful or get you to the next level. that's there, and finding those in a local community resource if it's not offered on your campus. Yeah.
Yeah. I would concur with that as well. And in addition to the community resource, again, understanding who we're serving and who we're talking about is also potentially recommending or directing them to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so there's a second question that's come in from Nick Harpster, who says, I work as a student support specialist, and many of these barriers that you are talking about are what I'm seeing in my students um, that I'm trying to serve. What are the best practices or tips? And I think, Adrian, you were kind of alluding to this earlier, but it sounds more like they're interested in more of the kind of concrete tips that you might have there. What are the best practices or tips on how to get these students in the door to physically speak to them about what they're facing, and then how you can help them with some of these struggles? Also, how can we make ourselves more available for students in these situations, or introduce them to people like me that actually exist in the system so we can help them navigate their lives? So I think there's um, it's funny because it kind of comes back full circle with the access and opportunity
Right.
that we were
Right.
talking before. But yeah, I'll let you all answer those questions there.
Okay. Well, let me start by saying this: that my response, Nick, will probably not satisfy you fully, or maybe not even at all. Um, as I mentioned before, I'm not a clinician, but I've seen some of how some of these programs and services work. The first thing that I would say is, and I know this is not what you meant, but the mindset of getting them to the door. We need to reframe that in terms of how do we get to where they are? And so, and Stephen talked about this earlier, and I know we'll probably talk about this a little bit more. But I think there's some great tools that are out there and great ways out there where through the use of digital enablement, support services, things like that, um, where oftentimes the awareness is not always there about what is available. And if it is, it's how do you gain access to it? And so it's really thinking about some of the programs that I've seen. It uses a good complement of the digital touch and the human touch. And so where and how can you bring those together? And then the other piece is really fully understanding from an advisor's perspective, really fully understanding what the system that you have is fully capable of. And what I mean by that is that there's sometimes, and I've seen this in institutions and organizations, where they know sort of tangentially or sort of the surface level of the support services that are offered, either through on-campus supports or even through digital resources. But it's sort of like that's just the tip of the iceberg. And again, this doesn't imply that you need to be, again, I use this term, a clinician, but fully understanding what is available as a resource. And then the other piece of that is that understanding what your either through your role or through your department's role or even the institutional organization, understand what are the things that you do and do well, and then what are the things that you can't or don't. And those are the things that you really need to lean deeply on technology or digital resources, community resources, those kinds of things, because it is not true that some help is better than no help. Some help can actually be more detrimental than no help. And so that's the thing that you want to sort of move away from. So again, probably not the best explanation. I'll turn to Steve to add a little more to that. But again, shifting the mindset in terms of how do they get to your door to how do we meet them where they are.
Right. I fully agree with that, Adrian. The perspective, from our point of view is what are all the touch points you have with students?
Right.
I'd literally make a list and interview people about all the different ways you're connected to students.
Mhm.
Obviously, digitally, email, text, mobile app, any online portal you have for paying, their tuition, or
Right.
how they might regularly engage with you. And
Faculty
then,
engagement.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and then, think about the physical touch points too. You've got registration and orientation and advisors that meet with students. I talked to a school last week who, has paid positions for student success coaches.
Mm.
If any of you are fortunate enough to have a function like that, pop-up events on campus and so forth. So finding, just list all the ways that you connect to students now, and then there's going to be an easy way to connect access to the benefits or a community resource set of resources to those connection points, and then market them. Make sure they're aware of them consistently. One of the things that comes up a lot in this conversation of marketing to or making students aware is the stigma of it. I don't want to raise my hand and say that I need help. And what we've been seeing more and more is to the degree that the institution can sort of make this less oppressive. Don't put this out front and center maybe in the student center, but provide a place for people to go where they have a little bit of privacy in talking about it. Create a student ambassador program, because the more students see people that look like themselves promoting unashamedly having access to basic benefits and resources, the more likely they are to participate. You go back to the great Michael Phelps campaign starting years ago about mental health, and it
Mm.
sort of gave everybody permission to say, okay, if that guy, so successful, can talk about this, then surely I can talk about it without fear. So finding, role models and people that look like them to talk about this is also extremely helpful.
Yeah, those are really good call outs. That's also a big part of the reason why we created Anna, which was, my own experience going to college. Again from South Georgia, where there weren't really a lot of people in my college that were from where I was from. And so stigma, which was actually one of the questions I wanted to touch on next, was a big aspect of that because I might know where I can go to get writing support, but I wasn't gonna be the first one you would see walk in that door to do that because, I didn't want people to think that I couldn't cut it. And so those are some of the things that, we wanna make sure that we're navigating with as well. Um, and, as frustrating as it might seem sometimes, making sure that we're reiterating to students time and time again that those resources are available. I heard someone mention switching from, just in case to just in time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times we tend to kind of give students a lot of those resources the first, year or first semester that they're in school, and maybe they get it, maybe they don't. And then they tend to forget, and now they're in that struggling moment, right? And in that fog they feel like their only option is to stop out or drop out. And so, if we can continue to just stay in front of them, and technology, I think, really does a good job of helping us to be able to, make one admin 10, 20 admins. If we can figure out ways to utilize tools and technology to make sure to stay in front of students, I think that we can stand a much stronger chance of getting them to create connections with people like Nick to get the support they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we're getting close to the time. I had two questions I really wanted to make sure that we touched on. The first one was actually on stigma. And so how can institutions remove or improve the stigma associated with asking for basic needs support? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in there go ahead and start with that.
Well, I'll just add to what I was saying before around, finding role models, finding student ambassadors, being so prolific with the communication about it that it becomes just the norm. That it's not something that you call out once in a college journey and then it goes away. Um, I think there are a multitude of ways to encourage people to participate. I was on a large private college campus recently, and the way that they sort of administer the basic needs function, the holistic function of it, made it feel less of a, obvious thing that I'm doing, and a more accepted part of campus life. They had incorporated a campus store into the student center, which was a pretty sizable store where you could go and pick up, everything from a handful of items to an entire meal if you needed it. They had sections where you could, for example, borrow graduation regalia if you didn't have the money to buy it. You could borrow proper attire for an interview if you didn't have that to wear. Just a variety of things like that. So the more things they started adding, the more participation they noticed they were getting overall, because they were then seen as, something that a broad cross section of students could participate in without feeling that they needed to do it, on the down low, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
it was a really interesting way to see it expressed
mm,
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this one, and I love all the points that Stephen has already made. My points here were going to be on messaging, thinking about language and framing, and the
Yeah.
consistency of that, which is good. And again, one of the tools that I've used before is using student learning journeys, which is understanding the various ways that students navigate through your systems, both on campus as well as online, and understanding those touch points. So Stephen mentioned that earlier. Advocacy and ambassadorship. Again, deploy people who do it, who know it, and get them out there, and also making it such a functional and fundamental part of how you think about the work of the institution that it just becomes common point. When I was a chief enrollment officer, during the admissions process orientation, we always talked about it as part of the list of services and things that were, a part of the delivery of the institution. The last point that I'll make is on the ease, and you just illustrated that, Stephen, through the campus store, and it's like it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and it's so everywhere that you don't know that it's there because it's everywhere.
Right. Right.
But also thinking and doing this in a dignified way, and so that the dignity comes in those who access it, and they need to access so that they feel dignified as part of that process.
yeah. I really really like that, and
Yes.
that's got to be critical and got to be key. There was actually one survey that we had found recently with some students where they were much more likely to want to go to, say, campus food pantries than off-campus food pantries, right? Because of that same sort of aspect, right? That they felt that their campus places felt much more safer for them in a lot of time in a lot of cases. More dignified in the sense that they tended to feel like they cared that they were there, as opposed to some of the ones that weren't on campus. And so I think that the more that we can really highlight it, as you mentioned, as a resource that's, yeah, everybody needs help sometimes, as opposed to it being more stigma inducing. That will certainly help in terms of ensuring that our students are getting what they're looking for.
Right. Agreed.
And so there's one last question that I wanted to leave for both of you all, and this is about the future. So, looking ahead, um, what do you think the future holds for our non-traditional students? And what proactive steps should institutions take to ensure that they're not leaving those students behind?
One thing is sure, there's going to be more of them, right? Uh, we're on this sort of enrollment cliff that we all know about with demographics and the lower birth rate and affordability and other issues, kind of obstructing the initial entry into college in a lot of cases, or at least the number of them. So the percentage of your students that are non-traditional is just going to go up over the next, well, for the rest of your career in all likelihood. So from our point of view, restructuring basic needs sort of as a core function of what you do when you think about the student that it's not
Mm,
extras, it's not nice to haves, it's knowing that these are now going to have to be permanent fixtures of what you're offering to ensure they're taken care of and they can stay in this journey with you. Um, think about the way that you're thinking of financial aid packages. It's not just about tuition any longer. It's about some of these extended needs that they have.
absolutely.
Um, and finally, I would say start that career pathing conversation as early as possible, and financial literacy, to call out the prior question. Um, get started on that as quickly as possible. Connect what students are doing, either in a skill path or in a professional path, to how they're going to find that job, and create more industry and even local partnerships with corporations and entities that
Mm,
you can get them experience with earlier in their college career.
point.
My two quick points, again, double click on what Stephen said. My two quick points are that institutions and organizations are going to become much more flexible and adaptable. And that's either by choice or by force, because the population is here and they'll continue to grow. And then the second point that I'll make is that institutions and organizations, as they become much more facile with data and technology, it's just going to improve the experience for learners in their journey through certification, degree, credential, what have you. But it's a necessary thing that's going to happen.
Right, right. Well, this was a very enlightening conversation. We touched on all different aspects from A to Z. I really appreciate you being here, Stephen, to help us to have this conversation. And as always, appreciate you being here as well, Adrian, to help lend your expertise as well. Um, and so thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. So many really good questions, so many good comments in the chat that I didn't get a chance to call out, but I appreciate the entire conversation here. If you're looking for a recording, we'll actually be sending out the recording of this afterwards as well if you want to share this with your colleagues. And as always, thank you for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care,
So
everyone.
Thank you.
great. Thank you.